Hello and welcome to Fairy Magic Foundations to Advanced Practice. Today is part 1, Foundations. You might be aware that this is a 2-parts course plus some additional courses that are deeply connected into this part 1. In case you're not aware, I will start by introducing you to the whole course, so you know what to expect and what to do with the material, the information that you will receive today, as well as planning what to do in the future about it. So part 1, Foundations, will give an introduction into what we commonly understand by fairy, disambiguating the term a little bit, looking into how it is understood cross-culturally, and how to interact with actual fairy beings. What is the degree of objectivity behind fairy encounters and spaces known to belong to fairy, and why is this relevant for us, and if it is relevant at all. So this is part 1. Expect meditations and practical activities to be carried out. Part 2, take things deeper and farther. It is also a whole lot more material, and the approach is more hands-on. Once we have covered the theory, then we can dive into the practice with a full understanding of who and what are we dealing with, are we engaging with. Aside from part 1 and part 2, there is another class, Fairy Herbs for Fairy Magic, that focuses specifically on the aspect of using herbs, water, raisins, plant raisins of different kinds, within a fairy-based spiritual practice. And to take that class, to attend that class, you do not need part 2 of this course. Foundations is enough. So basically, this class will provide you, as the name implies, a foundation to approach relationship connections with fairies and fairy magic in its multitude of forms. And we're going to disambiguate, discuss the term magic as well, because it can be misunderstood, overused, and it's good to have some clarity and understanding around it. With no further ado, we're going to move into what is actually the introduction. So some of the slides have a ridiculous amount of text on them. It is on purpose. Having this amount of text will save note-taking, will save the time that you're putting in writing down things that you hear. And usually when you're writing down a lot, some of what is being said gets overlooked. So knowing that you always have this recording or this class in form of a recording to come back to and read will save you the mental space and the physical time to actually take notes, to consult further. You can come back and consult this again as often as you need. So, and I will describe what is on the slides in case you're listening to this, you're just having in audio form. On the slide on the right side of the screen, there are 3 covers of books, 3 book covers, which are basically the books about fairy and fairy related that I authored. One is Where Fairies Meet. It shows a tree and its reflection in a pond. because the title is Parallels Between Irish and Romanian Fairy Traditions. So it shows this idea of parallelism in between a word that's tangible, visible to us, and another one that is more illusory, like the reflection in the water. Then the second book cover shows a young girl standing on a tree trunk that's fallen across a path in the woods. It is sunset. Sunset by itself is suggestive of this liminal time when fairies are active. The girl is dressed in white. And the way it stands on that log, her feet neither touch the ground, but she's not fully levitating. So she's also in between this liminal spaces. Her very presence inviting to ponder over, is this the young fairy seer the book is about, or is this the fairy that appears alongside the young fairy seer in the book? The name of the book is A Fairy Path, the memoir of a young fairy seer in training, and it is autobiographic. So yeah, that's about me. And growing up with fairy seership because of my grandmother, mostly. The third cover is Fairy Herbs for Fairy Magic on a purple, light purple background. You can see a bottle colored of amber, a little bit bright, and it sits on a wooden stump, and it is surrounded by flowers, purple flowers, yellow flowers, a little bit of green foliage. I'm probably not doing a great job of describing, but I'm trying my best. And this is Fairy Herbs for Fairy Magic, and it is a compendium, a practical guide to fairy herbalism. So how do we use herbs in a fairy-based personal practice? There's an upcoming class which is actually based on this book. So these are the images with my work on display, which I suggest not because it is my work, but because it is related to the classes that I teach. So back to our class today about the teacher. So it's me, Daniela Simina, and I grew up in Romania. And because I grew up in Romania, I also grew up steeped in lore and folklore. And because I grew up with my grandmother, I had exposure to this local fairy-related traditions. My grandmother was a medicine woman and a fairy seer. I have to explain the word fairy seer because it's not really a standard term. I borrowed it myself because there is no really linguistic equivalent for it. So a fairy seer would describe someone who receives their knowledge from fairies and they're doing work on behalf of the fairies themselves or as directed by the fairies. There is an exchange. The fairy seers carry out tasks. The fairies give knowledge and gifts. Yeah, gifts are mostly in form of healing and knowledge of various kinds. And these fairy seers also mediate between human communities and fairies themselves. And I'll talk about more about fairies. I just want to make it clear from the very beginning, we're not talking about cute cartoonish characters, childish, I mean, infantilized as portrayed in children books or on postcards. This is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about beings, spirits, various degrees of corporality that were taken very seriously by the previous generations for a number of reasons, which we will explore in the upcoming minutes. So I do follow a spiritual path that has fairies and fairy magic at its core. My path, generally speaking, is North Germanic paganism, but while I do interact with what we call deity or deities, the very core of my practice is centered around, or at its very core, my practice is centered around fairy beings, particularly the hidden people of the Scandinavian folklore, land spirits, house spirits, and these kind of spirits. I'm an author and a teacher. I have books, articles, blogs. I present at conferences, and obviously I teach classes. And as I mentioned, there are books that I wrote and go hand in hand with the classes that I teach. About this class, as I said, this is a two-part course, Foundation to Advanced. Part 1, Foundation, covers a lot of ground, theory and practice. You will get acquainted with different theories about the origin and identity of fairies in different traditions. You will explore the meanings and origin of the words fairies and fairy, capitalized and lowercase, to better understand the otherworldly places. And we will travel to fairy through the magic shamanic journey. We're going to learn about the benefits of connecting with fairies, and this is very important, the appropriate ways to engage. We'll learn about liminal time, fairy time, and portals between worlds. And we'll journey again to meet a fairy guide. Part 1 is self-standing. So if this is all that you ever need to know, want to know about fairy, great, part 1 will suffice. If you're looking to take other classes about fairies and fairy magic with me or other teachers, because I strongly encourage to take classes with other teachers as well and expand your horizon and see what type of information and teachings out there resonate with you the best, as opposed to just follow one narrow kind of line of thought, personal views that teachers have. So this class will be a prerequisite for Fairy Herbs for Fairy Magic, is a prerequisite for Part 2, Advanced Fairy Practices. What brings you here? I would like for you to just take a moment. If you're watching this as a recording, then feel free to pause the recording. You may get a piece of paper and something to write, or just sit with your own, with yourself, and try to answer these questions. Why are you taking this class? What brought you here? What do you expect to get out of it? There's no right or wrong answer, and by no means you don't have to read out what your thoughts are or share your thoughts with anyone unless you want to. What do you believe fairies to be? It may be as simple as, I have no idea, I am confused and I want to find out. Why do you seek to partner up with fairies? That is assuming that you do have such a wish, because you may just take the classes for purely informational purposes without the intent to actually build a working relationship. And while you're pondering over this, I will describe the picture that is on the slide. So there is a fairy lady holding in her right hand a staff that has like a big crystal at the top. In her left hand, she's holding a book, and the book is open, and there is like vapors or smoke rising, I would say vapors, lifting off the pages, and also birds that seem to take off from the pages of the book. There is a portal further in the distance, and a mountain view also further in the distance. And it's like the fairy lady, she just enacts some magic using her book and the stuff, or imparting knowledge that is magical in nature. Okay. We're going to move to the next slide, assuming that you had like minimal time to ponder over these questions, kind of flash out the reasons why you're taking this class, flashing out a little bit what you expect from it, and flashing out the reasons, if there are such reasons. Why do you want to enter in partnerships with fairy beings? Okay. I will ask that you take a piece of paper, because it is time for us to set up an intention for this class. And also, this is the time to disambiguate a little bit the word magic, because magic has, for many of us, the connotation of something that you see in the movies. And what I'm talking here is not the Hollywood, and special effects that shows, the wave of a hand or a wand, or, moving the nose, and have something, spark into being magically. Magic as intended, and as the way I will use the term for this class, and of course feel free to add to this any connotation and meaning that you feel to be true. So magic to me is the ability to direct your intent and harness energy. Yes, it is about harnessing and directing energy, but not with a purpose of miraculously manifesting something. The purpose would be to have that as a backup, as fuel for practical, meaningful, purpose-driven action that we take in the real world. Because differently from the magic that we see performed in, on screen and the like fantasy movies, there is just enough the intention and maybe the wave of a wand or the wave of the hand for things to manifest. In real world, we know that this is not enough. There is more action to be taken, more knowledge to be acquired, more purposeful steps to be taken in order to manifest, to accomplish something. But it is also, in addition to all that, it is also the ability to ride the wave, to bring in energy and factors that are more subtle than just moving physically pieces from here to there, To make a concrete example, if you're applying for a job, of course, you're going to write a resume, you're going to study and prepare for the interviews and have all those things into place. But then your resume is going to be one in hundreds, if not thousands of others that are landing in a recruiter's inbox. Wouldn't you want to be yours the one resume that really perks the recruiter's interest? Wouldn't you want to be your resume, your application, and your recruiter's recommendation to really elicit the interest of the prospective employer? And physically, you can only do this much. Write the best resume you can possibly write, polish your skills, both interviewing and technical knowledge, to the very best of your ability. But then you can also add the touch of magic, which involves harnessing your intention and then projecting that intention into the said resume, into the said application, to be received with interest by those who are going to read it. So giving you an extra chance to showcase your talents, to showcase your value as a valid applicant to for the said position. So magic here boils down to harnessing energy, and since we're talking about fairy and fairy magic, it is also about calling on help from fairy allies. So this would be what makes this a little bit more particular in comparison with magic in general. You would be calling here on help from specific allies. So back to our slide. We're going to set an intention for this class because energy follows intention. So implicitly, working magic requires the ability to set clear intentions about a purpose that we have. It requires the knowledge and the ability, so the technical part, necessary to direct the energy towards something that's something that we seek to accomplish. This kind of magic, this harnessing of energy requires discipline, organization. Don't do things randomly. So this is an exercise that primes you for further application of magic, fairy magic. We will begin by setting an intention for this class and work with it in the same manner that we would do for manifestation, and weave in the fairy component little by little. So what is on the slide in terms of picture, I will describe that in a moment. Before I start giving you the descriptions on the slides, please get your piece of paper and your writing implement. It has to be like a small piece of paper. Think of something maybe the size of a flashcard or even a sticker note. So really small. Think of something small. You don't have to write like literature. It doesn't have to be written beautifully like, calligraphy style. It is important that you get the energy of what you feel and what you would like, because that's an intention, what you would like to see happening, what you seek to manifest, to apply it in written form on that bit of paper. What is your intention for this class? Like, what drove you here? What are your intentions surrounding fairies and fairy partnerships in general? I'm just making up things. I don't want to influence your thoughts, but can be something along the lines, I want to learn more about fairy and dealing with fairy in general, or I'm fascinating, I seek to connect with the realm of fairy. I want to have a fairy guide. I want to enter a partnership with fairy guides and grow from there, learn from there. So anything, please take a few minutes to write it down while I will give a description of the images we have on the slide. So on the left upper hand corner, there is a red candle. Only the top of the candle, the very top of the candle is shown, and it is lit up. It is surrounded by this orb of light, not just the flame, but also the top of the candle. It is surrounded by an orb of light dotted with little golden sparks. Everything on a black background. And on the bottom right-hand corner, there is a piece of paper, white paper, sitting on a desk, and there is an ink bottle with a feather with a quill into it, there's also a blotch of ink on that paper and text written on it, suggesting that something has been written with a quill on that paper, maybe someone's intention or love letter to the universe or deity or fairy guides, who knows. So now that you have your intention written down and you know what the pictures on the slide are about, we are going to move on to the next slide. Put your paper somewhere handy. We're not going to do anything with it for a little bit, so just keep it handy. And talked about fairy and fairy faith and a fairy-based spiritual, a spiritual path that is fairy-based. And I want to disambiguate explain the term fairy faith. So faith, and I put the word faith there, it's in quotation marks. So fairy faith, the way this term is used here, simply means the belief in the existence of fairy. Now, how do you choose to think about fairy? That's your personal business. Some think of them as completely disembodied spirits, only capable of appearing in the realm of dreams or meditation or journey. Some have experience with them appearing like in real life, taking different forms, communicating through omens, communicating through making little strange things happening around us. So whatever your understanding, some understand them as just spirits of nature, some understand them as not just spirits of nature. We'll cover all this, but whatever your belief happens to be, fairy faith as a term is meant to cover it. Now, fairy faith or fairy spiritual, fairy-led spiritual path can be approached like a self-standing path, spiritual, esoteric path, if you choose to relate to it as such. And it also goes along with any other beliefs that one may hold. And in due time, we'll see that it's really hard to find a culture, if possible at all, to find a culture that does not have some form, some sort of fairy being involved in there. And my apologies, I'll go back because I did not give a description of the picture here that we have on the slide. It is a lady standing in a field, it's in just grasses. It is night. It's a very nice indigo blue sky. So everything is in shades of indigo blue, the lady, the sky, the grass. The sky is studded with stars, all bright, silvery, and the lady herself seems to be covered in this little dots of light sparkling on her hair, on her dress, quite an ethereal appearance. This is kind of close to what I envision a fairy being to be, but of course, you are going to envision a fairy being based on what your own personal beliefs are, because they're valid. Okay, next slide. Let me move my own screen off the picture here. I will start by describing the picture actually, because it's going to make a lot of sense. It is related to the text on the slide and with some of the theories about the origin of fairy. What you're seeing here is the background is the sky with clouds, but it is actually a floor. The clouds are making up a floor, you know, like that kind of image when you're in an airplane and you're flying above the clouds and it looks like the clouds beneath you create a floor. So it's that kind of thing. And right on top of this floor, there is a door. Through the door is open and one can see an earthly landscape with some mountaintops. And leaning into the door jamb to the right, there is it could be a fairy, could be an angel. So it's a being with black wings, dark feathers, wings. The being it herself, it's a lady, she's dressed in black, barefooted, and she's just leaning into this door jamb. The door is open, everything is above the clouds, so high up in the sky, but through this door she can see an earthly landscape. And we'll see in a second why this picture relates to some myths, to some stories about fairy origins. So the title on the slide is Theories about what fairies are and where do they come from. One. There's many of these. This is just one. The theory of fallen angels and betwixt man and angel. So fallen is put in quotation mark because it's not about morally fallen. We're talking about literally fallen from somewhere high up down onto the ground. So fallen here has a physical sense, no moral connotations. And also I put in quotation marks betwixt man and angel because that's actually a quotation from Reverend Robert Kirk, whose name is right here on the slide. He lived between 1644 and 1692, and he wrote The Secret Commonwealth of Fauns and Fairies, which I strongly suggest that you read. So, Reverend Robert Kirk, he was a Scottish pastor. He was a minister. He was a church person, highly educated. For that was people reaching the highest level of education, and at his time, it's clergy. And or among those who reach highest levels of education were clergy. And he had like this very keen interest in fairies and fairy related phenomena, which was quite dangerous. So he was there, you know, proponents that these beings are real, they're not demonic. Yes, they're not harmless, but they're not something to be demonized either. This was quite forward thinking for his time. I mean, we're talking here 17th century, okay? In a conservative Scotland, that's a Protestant religion. So he was very quite far ahead for his time and took risks in writing this book where he analyzes beautifully the nature of fairies, and he talks obviously through the prism of his own understanding and education and Christian background, but he also takes into consideration the existing lore and folklore, the tradition of fairy witches, fairy doctors, and manages to be like quite neutral. He doesn't really pronounce any judgment against various groups of people engaging with fairies. Of course, he cautions against it, but he doesn't seem to be taking like aggressive side. I can talk, I promise. He doesn't seem to be taking sides in an aggressive manner, oh, good versus bad, which could have gotten him into trouble considering the age when this material was written. So back to Kirk's book. It gives several stories about the origin of fairies. So fairies as fallen angels. Fallen, as I said, falling from the sky down to the earth, not morally fallen, physically, dropping from the sky to the earth. This happened because some of the fairies were kicked out. Some angels, sorry, initially angels were kicked out because they did not explicitly take God's sides in the rebellion. We're talking here about a rebellion that supposedly took place based on biblical interpretation and materials written adjacent to the Bible. We have the story of this rebellion that happened in heavens when angels, so the argument took part between God and Lucifer. And angels kind of took sides, not kind of, angels took sides, some siding with God and some siding with the rebellious Lucifer. But there were also a group of fairies that were left in between who didn't basically want to take anyone's side. So they were casted down to the earth. God wins the argument. So the angels who, or the beings who sided with him, they become this white, bright angels and they stay in heaven. The angels who sided, or the beings who sided with Lucifer, they're all cast down into hell. So that's Lucifer's angels. Accompanying angels or demons, they become demons. And those who are like in between, they're just thrown out through the door. Hence the parallel with the door here that we have in this picture. They're just thrown out through the door and they land onto Earth and become fairies because they're too good to go to hell, but not good enough to ascend to heavens. So they're left on the Earth waiting. So another variation of this is that all of them, all these beings were initially angels. And again, we have the argument between God and Lucifer. And in the midst of this argument, God, as the story goes, just slams the heavens door open and this huge air draft creating and swooshing bunch of angels out there. So they fell onto the earth. And as the story goes, those who landed in water became mermaids, and those who reached the ground landed in, then went into mounds and caves, and they became the land spirits, land-bound fairies, as they appear in lore and folklore later on. A third variation, still biblical based, and this is where we have this betwixt man and angel. Adam and Eve were sent to earth, right, to multiply and have children and populate the earth, and they started to do their job of procreating. And they had so many children that it was really hard for Eve to keep them all neat and clean. And one day God announces his visit. So Eve starts to clean this many children that she has. And basically she only gets to wash and tidy a number of them, but not all of them. So in order to not appear, like neglectful of her children in the eyes of God, she hides the others, the one that she didn't manage to wash. So she tells them to stay hidden, sends them in the yard, wherever, mounds, trees, hillocks, trees, bushes, just stay hidden, don't show up. So God comes in, asks Eve, according to the story, are these all the children that you have, Eve? And Eve says, yes, these are all the children that I have. And God, because he's God and he knows everything, he says, well, the ones who are hidden shall remain hidden, and they will be the hidden people. And we have in the and they became the fairies basically. So they're like human. That's the betwixt man and angel. So They're human, they're Eve's children, but in the same time, God wills them to remain hidden and become this hidden people, the fairies. So their nature changes towards fairy. So in Scottish and also in Norse and Scandinavian lore and folklore, fairy beings are also the elves, the Alfar are also referred as the Huldufolk, the hidden people. So these are the first set of stories about what fairies are and where do they come from. And here we go, slide 2, what fairies are and where do they come from. And I will start by describing the picture. And we have, so this is something made of plaster. So it's a little statuette, little figurine of a fairy. And she has, so she's tiny, she's cute, she sits in the grass. She has a skirt made of tiny pink flowers. The top she wears seems to be made of leaves or other flower petals. She has a little crown made of also pink flowers matching the skirt. She's smiling and she has wings and there's a rosebud next to her. The picture shows a statuette, okay? So it's something that looks artificial. And we're going to see why artificial is something to be taken into account when we're talking about fairy representations that follow this prototype of winged beings dressed in flowers or with clothes made of flower petals and leaves and all smiley and, just making gardens look pretty. So we're going to go back to that in a second. So back to theories about what fairies are and where do they come from. There is a theory of fairies as elementals. First of all, we need to be aware that behind this theory is a lady named Elena Blavatsky and the Theosophical movement. She's the one who pioneered and established the Theosophical movement. Forward thinking in many ways, but also restrictive and conservative in other ways. And it all took off, or it took roots, or it happened, it unfolded around the 1875, so 19th century. The theosophical ideas and philosophy are rooted in Greek philosophy, especially Empedocles, and Empedocles, 444 BCE, so long ago. He had this the idea that the whole universe and everything that we see and what we don't see is constituted of the elements of earth, water, fire, and air. Just missing the fourth one. So later on, the ether element was added to this, but Empedocles, he had this four elements in mind. Then we had Paracelsus, which is the late 1400s Common Era, early 1500s Common Era, who developed this. He studied the Greek philosophy and he's a father of alchemy, which in turn has become the grandparent of chemistry and modern medicine. So Paracelsus expanded on this idea of elements and elementals. We're going to elementals in a second. Elements as basic constituents of what we see, world, human beings, and the interaction in between these in various proportion shapes life and life forms around us and forms that are not alive by human standards. So he went further to associate different beings to different elements, and that evolved into other concepts with the time. So we ended up at some point with gnomes, like elementals, spirits representing the earth or connected to the earth. We end up with salamanders to represent fire, or as spirits, elementals of the fire. I'll explain the salamanders in a second. We end up with undines and naiads and dryads. Dryads, they are like tree spirits, and undines are for air, I believe, and naiads for water. I might be switching the last two. So we have the strict categorizing, we have elementals. And then Blavatsky come with the idea fairies are elementals. So every single being that we understand as fairy is perforce an elemental. So it's like boxing. We have fire elementals, that's fire fairies. We have air elementals, that's air fairies. We have water, and so on and so forth. And we have spirits of plants and trees, which are also fairies. Which I tend to disagree profoundly with this for a number of reasons that we will develop. I'm not judging anybody who holds on to this ideas and opinions, because your ideas are your ideas and your beliefs are your beliefs, and there's no one's business to tell you how to change them. Just be aware that the practice you're building has to have a degree of consistency for your own comfort with it. So it will develop based on the ideas that you hold about fairies. And don't be afraid, ideas may change over time. Mine have changed radically multiple times over the years. And they were informed by my experiences and things also that I read and I saw other people experiencing, not heard, but saw other people experiencing. So it's all beautiful as long as we're not grabbing onto super fixed points and refuse the idea that things are mutable and change, including our beliefs. I promise I will disambiguate salamanders, clarify salamanders as spirits of fire, and to show like a good degree of misunderstanding sneaking into beliefs related to fairies and elementals here in the 15th and 16th century. So the idea of salamanders as spirits of fires, elementals of fire, came from the fact that people were bringing in dried wood to light up the fire, and salamanders, sorry, that's the German kicking in, and I tend to pronounce the S as a Z. Apologies. So salamanders, they take shelter, they find their places within dry logs. So when people were bringing logs to light up fires in the stove, in the fireplace, to warm themselves up or cook, obviously from the flaming logs, salamanders will escape and will come out. And it was this sight of beings coming out from amidst flames, and there was the belief, oh, they live in fires. So it was a misinterpretation. They didn't live within the fire, they're actually escaping fire. So salamanders, just little reptiles doing their own thing and being chased out by the logs burning, and of course they don't want to get burned, so they get out. So now, what is more upsetting to me, at least, about this fairies as elementals view that is promoted by the Theosophical movement? This theory presents fairies as not fully developed forms of consciousness. So they're there, not really knowing what to do about themselves. needing human intervention. So they need human thought and human intent to take shape, to manifest. And these beings are presented as looking up to humans as the pinnacle of creation and wanting to become humans. So hoping that they will one day develop into humans or growing into humans or reincarnate into humans, however theosophists choose to think about it. Now, this idea is vastly at odds with what we know from folklore, hundreds of years of recorded folklore, and encounters that are still taking place in our modern times, where people have experiences with fairies that are vastly, vastly different than this not defined state of existence, not fully formed consciousness, depending on humans. To make it clear, I do not advocate or sustain that there is no such thing as an elemental fairy. Farther from the truth. I do believe, and it's my personal belief, might be right, might be wrong, but it's my belief. I do believe that um, fire, earth, water, they have their own elemental spirits. They have their own forms of consciousness, both in larger and more encompassing, or smaller, like more local. I do believe this to be the case. And if and I do believe, I personally include, like in a wider, using a broader brush stroke, I do include those among fairy beings, but I do not believe that all fairies are reducible to these elemental categories. So are the fire, earth, air, whatever elements, elemental fairies? Yes, you might say so. Are all the fairies divisible in these four categories and neatly fitting into those? No, they are not, because we will see further people's experience point out over centuries, point out to completely different reality and understanding. Fairies as nature spirits. I mentioned earlier about dryads as spirits of trees as they were seen by in Greek mythology. You have dryads, you have nymphs, you have so they're like spirits, and they're like humanoid looking. They're like what we would call, broadly in what we would include in the broader definition of, fairy as an umbrella term. And here we have spirits that pertain to a specific place. It's called genius loci or genius loci, if we're to stick to the Latin. They mean spirits of a place or specific land features. And they're generally bound to places. For example, you have the spirit of a certain mountain. You have the spirit of a certain lake, pond. You have the spirit of a certain waterfall or river. So these are spirits that stay to the land form that they are associated to. This is not said that they cannot engage with people in dialogue, but this dialogue happens either on site when the human goes there and visits. It may happen in meditation. They may appear and speak to you in meditation. They may appear and speak to somebody in dreams, but they will not actually leave the place to relocate and follow humans to other places across the world, because they are bound in a sense to that landform. Plant and spirit trees. We have spirits that are related to the individual plant, like one of the oaks growing in my backyard or one of the pine trees growing in my backyard has, this is an animistic perspective, understanding that there are various forms of consciousness. Consciousness is not something that only humans have. Animals, plants, rocks, different form of consciousness, all worthy of respect. So we have spirits related to individual plants or trees, or overarching spirits for an entire genus or species. For example, mentioned an oak growing in my backyard, there is that oak spirit, the spirit of that oak, versus in general the consciousness of oak trees as a generic general species. And some people include these also in under the fairy category umbrella, interacting with the spirit that dwells in a tree, or with the consciousness of that specific tree that appears in take form of a spirit and engages in dialogue. So local versus general. And the idea of my fairy here on the picture having this wings, and it's a clearly human constructed image that draws in on bits and pieces from various beliefs. She's sitting by a flower, she's part of the natural landscape, but in the same time she's shaped in the image that some people believed fairy to be minute and winged, and we'll get to minute and winged shortly. Okay, different picture here. This is so I'll start by describing the picture. It's that of a lady who sits on water. So she sits on a body of water. It's like both emerging from the water and also like descending to sit on the water, and part of her image is reflected in this body of water. You can think of it as the fairy or the spirit of a certain body of water, or a bigger, broader fairy being who just landed on this body of water. The picture is, so the farthest in the background is dark, probably night, and the rest of it is like golden, bright, lot of bright light. So the lady appears to be made of light herself, or in any way shining. You might as well think of a goddess. What would be a typical classical representation of a goddess in looking at this person sitting on water. And this takes us to slide number 3 about theories about what fairies are and where do they come from. And we're going now to talk about fairies as demoted deities. Demoted is also in quotation mark because we'll see it is not a true demotion. Some people see it as a demotion, some don't. As mentioned previously, like in the very, very beginning of this class, we're going to look at fairies across different cultures, because no culture has the monopoly on fairy beliefs. So we'll start with the Irish fairy lore. And in Irish lore, there are the Tuatha De Danann, who are a race, mythical race. They're considered to be gods. And they're going underground at some point when the mythical and legendary, in between Milesians, humans, the ancestors of the Gaels, came to Ireland. So there was a fierce battle, and in the end, the humans, the Milesians, wins, and the Tuatha De Danann are driven under the ground. where they're joining the she. Okay, so she refers to as where as I with this father with this accent on the I, accent mark on the I. The fact that they're joining the she points out to the fact that there were already fairy beings existing in the land, in the landscape, dwelling there. So the Tuatha Danann, this mythical race of the gods of Ireland, they are moving in to join the existing she, and they become she themselves. So not all of the Irish deities are specifically labeled, linked as part of the she. Some are. So Irish mythology is a very, very complicated um, subject, and I will defer to specialists to talk about that. I will just stick around this fairy component and this overlapping between um, deities and um, fairies. And there are more resources at the end of this presentation. There is like a whole list of resources that I would suggest for you to consult to learn more in depth, and from people who really have gotten deep, deep, deep into the study of Irish mythology and the Irish fairies in particular. So for now, we're going to focus on few of like best known figures that you are probably likely to encounter and maybe connect with, depending on what pantheon of gods or what set of spiritual beliefs you feel more drawn toward. From the Irish, we have the Andagda. So he's known as King of all fairies in Ireland. So there is a story in which he's called King of all fairies in Ireland, but he also has dual aspect of powerful Irish god. We have Anya, the Irish goddess, who is also known as a fairy queen and is celebrated as such at midsummer. If you go into Norse, the Nordic Scandinavian, we have Freyr. So he's a Norse god, but he's also ruler of Alfheimr and thus connected to the Alfar, which are Scandinavian elves. In Romanian, we have Sânziana, Ileana Sânziana. She's known as Queen of all fairies in Romanian folklore, but once upon a time she was a solar goddess. So you've noticed on this list names of deities or beings that were once known and worshipped and honored as deities in the ancient times, who did not get lost to the culture entirely, to the human consciousness, awareness. They're not lost entirely, but have been integrated among fairies and among fairy beings, and are now respected, honored as fairy kings and fairy queens. This may seem as a demotion. Okay, you're no longer a god or goddess, now you're a fairy king or queen. However, the reason why I do not see this as a demotion, if we look in the specific cultures at how these beings are regarded and honored, I don't want to say worship, because this may make people could make some among us uncomfortable, because there's the belief we only worship gods, we don't worship fairies. Fair enough, but they are nevertheless honored. So offerings are left for them in the same way as offerings were left in the olden of times, offerings of food, dairy products. For example, going back here to the top of the slide with Andagda, King of all fairies in Ireland, when the Milesians took over Ireland, there was the Milesian kings, they started to treat with disrespect the old deities now turned fairies. And in response, because fairies and fairy beings have agency, some of them have agency over weather, some of them have agency over the earth fertility and productivity. They have agency, they can influence people's luck, people's health. So they're not devoid of power. So in Ireland, they sent the Milesians, seeing that the cows don't give milk anymore and the earth doesn't give crops anymore and people are starving and the weather is terrible. So they sent out their wise man, their Amergin Glungal, and he went there and talked to Andagda, to the king of fairies, and they made this deal that the humans will give the fairies a certain portion of the harvest, cereals, and a certain portion of the cow's milk. And as long as this was done, plenty, there will be plenty in Ireland. So they did so, and everything they follow through, the humans follow through with their promise, and the situation was remediated. There was food, there was plenty for people to thrive. Anya, she's a fairy queen. She's celebrated as such on Midsummer. She seems to have connection with healing, women, empowerment, a form of a sun, the sun that is mild. So not the sun that is destructive and burning and scorching the ground, but that mild sun that makes crops mature and grow. Also, midsummer, both Romanian and Irish lore, it is said that fairies bless medicinal herbs, or herbs to be used for medicinal and magical purposes. And we'll go back to that in a second. Until then, Freyr, Norse god, ruler of Alfheimr, he was worshipped and offerings were left for him. So we have saga materials and we have historical material talking about him receiving offerings in mounds. So it was a syncretism there in between Freyr the god and Freyr presented as euhemerization, euhemerized, presented as a human king. But nevertheless, the idea of leaving offerings for him, because if not, there will be consequences. There are consequences for people living in the land. So this is anything but disempowering. They had to be acknowledged, they had to be offered to, they had to be treated with respect. And Sunziana, this is a big overlap here in between the attributes of Sunziana, Romanian goddess, and Anya, the Irish goddess. Sunziana also was once a solar goddess associated with this benevolent sun and benevolent warmth that makes crops mature and grow. And her celebration day is on June 23rd. So it was like related to the summer solstice. It has been syncretized. It has been assimilated into the celebration, to the feast of Saint John. But in Romania, the feast is still known as the feast of Sânziene. So the holiday bears the name of the fairy queen and her entourage. And same as in Ireland, this is a time when people believe fairies are blessing the herbs for medicinal and magical purposes. So that's the time when gifts are being left out, offerings, food offerings are being left out for fairies, celebrations are being held in their honor, and herbs are harvested. It may not seem as much for us today when if you have a pain somewhere in the body, there's a Tylenol, there's an ibuprofen, there's a painkiller of sorts. But for people back in the day, a few hundred years ago, medical knowledge was not readily available, if at all. countryside, rural areas. So knowledge of herbalism and trust that herbs can solve a number of health-related problems, whether through their inherent chemical, magical property, chemical, medical properties or magical properties, was very important, was life-saving. So it was really, really crucial for people to make sure that they are on the good side for all purposes intended. It was crucial for people to be on the good side of these fairy beings, kings, queens, local fairy spirits inhabiting the landscape, because their destinies were intertwined and human life was greatly dependent on the benevolence of these fairy beings. Fairy beings a crossover with the dead and human abductions. So we have stories telling about dead people getting into fairy, and there is capitalized fairy here as an indication for the fairy realm. We'll get into the more details about this. Just think now fairy as a bigger, broader continent with many, many countries on it. Okay, so that would be fairy, the bigger continent, and then smaller regions, smaller countries, subdivisions where different kinds of fairies, based on their culture, based on the local beliefs, um, where they're living. So from Irish lore, from Scandinavian lore, we get to learn about humans who die, but then they show up in dreams or in visions, or even they make an appearance, not as ghosts, but rather as themselves in their human form. They make an appearance and they're telling that they actually didn't die. They were taken into fairy, again, capital fairy, by fairy beings. What kind of fairy beings varies from culture to culture and belief, from one set of beliefs to another. Some were telling that yes, they did die indeed, but after death they joined the fairies, so their soul, that part of themselves, the essence, materialized, manifested into fairy. We have a lot of stories about people being abducted into fairy, and we'll have an awful lot of material to cover in the other side of the other part of the course in part 2, because we would make this one a day-long event if we get into all of the stories. So we have that people abducted into fairies, and this can be children. There is the grim there are the grim retellings of changelings. I would just look the work of Morgan Daimler. Morgan Daimler, she's an expert on fairy beliefs, worldwide known fairy expert. Their name is on the bibliography list and resources. They have an excellent class about changelings on the Irish Pagan School. So changelings is about the fact that young children, babies, brides, young mothers, sometimes young men were abducted, taken into fairy, and that a replacement was left for them, especially children. While there were probably few genuine episodes of fairy abductions, there is also an awful lot of misinterpretation and labeling people with special needs, non-neurotypical people, being labeled as changelings and therefore being brutalized and harmed in an attempt to bring back the real person. So lack of knowledge, lack of understanding of medical causation, or blatant refusal to believe that a person is actually afflicted by a disease or is simply non-neurotypical. So the refusal of that and shifting back into the obscurantism Same as attributing salamanders, calling them fire spirits when their poor reptiles were running away from flaming logs. So it's the same lack of understanding or refusal to understand of the reality of a condition, medical condition in this case. So yeah, there is a really dark side to the story of changelings. But if you're going to read, for example, Barbara Rieti stories from Newfoundland, it's actually her PhD thesis. Uh, she collected there even first-hand accounts given by people, first-hand, second-hand accounts given by people who dealt with such fairy phenomena like fairy abductions. And there's there the story of this man who tells that his wife went outside to um, pin clothes on a cloth line, and it was winter, and it was a time when uh, what they known as the wild hunt or Odin's hunt rides around. So she's basically abducted, but something. So they're doing certain things. I believe, if memory serves, he actually runs out because she's screaming as she's being abducted and virtually lifted into the air. So he could see this, and he grabs her legs, and they're pulling down, and um, she's brought down. So basically, he rescues her from this attempted fairy abduction, and she's like frozen, and she still holds the socks in her hands when she's returned. Um, so I'm not sure if he really pulls her down on the spot, or they go for a priest, and they use prayers and other things and basically bring her down. What I remember clearly is that when she came back, she couldn't remember anything from the episode, but still had the socks that she was trying to put on the um, cloth line. So we have, so some people end up into fairy, some return, some don't, and they undergo a certain process to be turned from humans into fairies. So some of the fairies were once upon a time humans. There is the ballad of Tamlin that talks about a man who was taken into fairy and then turning, he's a human, but he's taken into fairy. We have stories. There's a story of this young boy. I believe it happens in Ireland. It's a young boy who was picking berries, blackberries, and then he disappears. And one moment he was there, and then he wasn't there, and people don't left stone unturned looking for him. And then he comes up after 3 or 4 days, and then he gives his account. He's like, well, I was taken to this place, and it was fairy. There was this lady. So he describes this quite unusual setting. And then they started to wash him, and he refused any food that they would give him, and they're washing him and trying to put ointments and give him different clothes. And they said, they were saying, it's like there is something about the world of humans that still sticks onto him, and as long as we don't take that trace out, we cannot turn him into a fairy and make him one of ours, so he cannot really live with us. And what happened, and the boy was aware that he has a thorn, a blackberry thorn stuck under one of his nails. And and of course that he didn't want to say anything because he didn't want to stay in fairy. He wanted to go back home to his family. And because they couldn't find the thorn, they just let go of him and thrust him and drop him back into the same blackberry bush where they took him initially. So people find him there, or he walks out and meet the ones searching for him. It's good to keep in mind that fairies are usually people are usually taken into fairy for the fairies' benefit and not so much for the benefit of the human involved. There are stories of musicians, stories of people who possess some outstanding gift who are taken into fairy, sometimes forever, sometimes they bargain or outsmart the fairy guardian and they're able to escape. But sometimes there is a contractual type of relationship where these people are being held into fairy for a while. Sometimes they're heavily compensated and heavily rewarded for their service, especially musicians. You go there, you sing, play for a fairy party, fairy event, you're lavishly rewarded and then sent back home, where you may return 100 years later. So much for the benefit. We have stories of, I recommend Eddie Lenihan. I believe it is on your resource list. Eddie Lenihan, great Irish storyteller. And he has a lot of accounts, authentic accounts from Irish fairy lore that you may want to read. So there are stories of women, midwives being taken into fairy and assist fairy women to give birth. It looks like the birth rates among fairies is extremely low, and for some reason they need human help and qualified midwives to deliver fairy babies and care for them, at least in the beginning. So, and midwives are oftentimes very well paid, compensated for the service provided. Sometimes the stories don't end up so well for the midwife involved. So we're not delving into details here. It was just the idea to see that there is a crossover between fairies and the dead, and fairies and humans crossover due to human abductions. Because some of these humans, sometimes they remain part of the fairy realms, sometimes they come back, but they still carry some imprint of the fairy nature that they were exposed to. Okay. I believe this is the last one. Theories about what fairies are and where do they come from. And the picture here is a gentleman standing, and he's dressed in a very fancy outfit. He has black leggings, he has boots, mid-calf boots, and they're also black, probably leather with some golden laces. He wears a tunic, short sleeves with the shoulders are like winged out, and it's all black and gold. He stands with his arms crossed over his chest. He has some leather straps wrapped around his hands. Don't see anything useful here, probably just for design, or who knows, maybe it's a magical amulet. And he has like this massive chain, golden chain with a big pendant around his neck. He has long hair, a little bit of a beard and mustache, and you can see a little bit of pointed ears, which we're going to discuss in more in details shortly. So his we're so fairies, they can appear as men, women, undifferentiated gender. They really fit a they cover, not fit, they cover a very broad spectrum. So now really, who are the fairies? A working definition is finally emerging. They are powerful beings possessing magical powers. As we have talked so far, we saw them having agency, especially fairy kings, fairy queens, having agency over nature, um, influencing a people's ability to survive. Remember Irish fairy lore, where they had to actually commit. Humans have had to actually commit to give fairies their due, so the land would yield enough to support its human inhabitants. Excuse me. They had powers, fairy queens and their retinues, they have powers over herbs for medicinal uses. And when that is all the medicine that you have at your disposition, it better works, because your life otherwise is at risk. So they do have magical powers, and fairies inhabiting boulders or using trees and as entry points on some people's property, which is a common theme in Scandinavian fairy lore. So they can have huge influence on a family luck and the luck of the homestead and the farm. So some, but not all have agency over elements. Some, but not all have agency directly or will bother to directly influence humans' life. So they have different purviews. They are of all sizes and appearances, and they're humanoid, at least to some extent. Some have wings, some don't have wings. We're going to get into the details of this wing thing. Remember that the picture from a few slides ago where I said this is like, it looks artificial and it is on purpose because there is a lot of those who endeavored to write fantasy literature for children took a lot of liberties, to adapt folklore and what they know from people's experiences about fairies. So it was this massive adaptation, this massive distortion. So hence the artificial portrait emerging. So they are humanoid to some extent because some of them have also animal or animalesque features. Some are fond of humans and some are not. So there are fairies who are more friendly toward human communities and fairies who are not friendly, not because they're evil, but think of sharks or think of bears or of wolves. That's the nature. Some of them are predators. In same way, in the same way as some animals can be predators, some animals are just herbivores and would not attack other animals for meat. So to procure meat and feed themselves. The most important aspect is that fairies are not subservient to humans. So humans are surely not at the top of the food chain, or if they are, fairies do not have by design the purpose do not serve by design the purpose of helping humans, babysitting humans. They are willing to engage in partnerships that are mutually advantageous. Fairies have been around for a very, very, very long time. Remember the Irish story of fairies pre-existing in the Irish landscape. So when gods themselves decided to merge, to come in, to join, fairies were already there. So that points to a very, very remote past. They have very long lifespan, quasi-immortal, but they're not really immortal because they can be hurt. There are things that can hurt fairies and they can even be killed. They are not one homogeneous group. Even within the same culture, where you're dealing with the same type of fairies, they're not one homogeneous group. And there can be rivalries between different factions. So there's an error here. Rivalries can rage. So there are rivalries and conflicts can rage between different factions. And I'm pointing out here, there's also on your list of resources, the doctoral thesis, Walter Evans Vance. He wrote about fairies and Irish fairies. So fairy faith in Celtic countries, I believe. Yes, that's the name of the thesis. And he writes extensively about the fairies in Irish culture. The book is a product of his time. Its time was published in 1911, so 100 years ago. Keep that in mind. Elements of racist thinking and this kind of things are blatant in the introduction of the book, so skip that. What I found valuable there is the story material, so the accounts that are being collected and told from people native to the land and having had this experience of fairies themselves, or growing up exposed, immersed in those fairy beliefs that are authentic to the culture. So no fabrication, no sanitizing, no adaptation to fit any literary tastes of the, elites or upper classes. So it's just the stories given by the people, the folk. So this is why I find the book valuable, except for the story material. It's not worth reading the rest. So what we know there from that book and others, similar groups, is that people have witnessed, humans have witnessed groups of fairies from different areas, sometimes from the same areas, organized as armies and battling one another. So they're not one homogeneous group, and there are rivalries, and rivalries can appear in like military conflict or sports that become fierce and very conflicted encounters. And sometimes humans get caught in the middle of this, like asked to be the judges in games, which puts the human in a very difficult position, because to whoever they grant the victory, it's going to be in the good graces of that group, but then it's going to be on the blacklist for the other group. So this is why getting into fairy partnerships is a delicate business, because being in the good graces of some fairy queen or king may put you on the blacklist on a different fairy queen or king. So that's that. Overall, fairies think from an animistic viewpoint, have respect for personhood, everyone's personhood and as form of consciousness. Fairies are people, and they should be treated with respect. Fairies, fairy, in lowercase. I use it as an umbrella term to keep things simple and clear, because imagine what happens if I go, okay, and we have the she, and we have the alfar, and we have the skogra, and we have the Sunziana and the Rusali and elves, and we're going nowhere if I am to every single time name like 10 groups of fairy beings to get the idea that they're different groups, to get that across. So just think fairy as an umbrella term for fairy beings. Intention setting moment. Now take a moment to review what you wrote on your piece of paper. Just sit with a thought, even if you cannot decipher exactly, if it's like crammed, jammed letters one on top of the other. Just try to remember, let percolate the thought that you held when you wrote your intent on that piece of paper. And then keep that piece of paper handy. Close your eyes. Feel the breath moving upward from the soles of your feet up toward the crown of your head. And exhale skyward. Breathe in through your feet up into the body. And breathe out skyward. And now invite this ascending course, this ascending flow that you have set into motion, mean it to continue by default. You're going to create another flow that moves downward. So breathe in through the top of the head. Feel the breath moving downward until it reaches your pelvic floor. And then the exhale down through the legs and through the feet into the earth beneath. Again, breathe in through the top of your head, down into the pelvic floor, and then out into the ground beneath. And let these two flows to continue to circulate through your body. We're seeking to bring ourselves into alignment. So once into alignment, we can harness, we can corral, harness, and direct the energy as needed. Bring the awareness simultaneously to the bottom of your feet and the top of your head, and breathe in, getting the breath to come in, flow in through both ends, top and bottom. The two streams cross paths somewhere around your diaphragm. And then breathe out. Each stream moving out oppositely from where it entered. Again, breathe in, feet and top of the head. Breath merges at the diaphragm, and then it moves out. And now let everything go. Just go. Breathe in through the top of your head. And as you exhale, let the breath drop into your pelvis. Visualize your pelvis as a bowl. Maybe something made of precious metal, crystal, something beautiful. And at the center of that bowl, there are coals, embers, which your breath, your out breath, fans. So they glitter brighter, they glimmer brighter. They don't blast into flame, but they're just more radiant. So breathe in through the top of the head, down into the belly. And exhale, fanning the coals in that lower abdomen. Fanning the energy in our inner reservoir. Next time you breathe in, hold the breath. Now breathe out, moving the energy, the heat from your abdomen down through your arms and out through your palms. Feel your palms activating. Maybe your fingers tingling. And now get the paper, the slip of paper that you wrote your intent on, and fold it, place it in between your hands, hold it. And with each out breath, feel the energy from your palms radiating into the paper, into the intent that you placed there. Energizing. Your intention. One more breath. And then you can gently open the eyes and put the paper away, because we're going to do more things with it later. Some commonly questions asked about fairies. Where do fairies live? If they can cross on our side, can we also cross into their side? As I said already, fairies, I'm going to use it here as a collective noun. So, and I already explained the idea of fairy that was written in capital letters, I mean capital F. The word is used sometimes interchangeable with other world. And I will repeat, I think of it as a collective of places like countries on a continent where each country is inhabited by different types of fairies. And sometimes this, I do not want to come exceeding compartmentalizing. Sometimes each place can be associated with a certain culture that fosters certain beliefs in fairies. Some of these places are for specifically certain types of beings to inhabit themselves. I don't think there really is a very clear answer to this. I would suggest, however, the work of Morgan Daimler, Fairy, the Other World by Many Other Names. So Fairy, the Other World by Many Other Names, Morgan Daimler. What we do know is that different locations in the physical human world act as entry points to fairy, capital F, their world or worlds. Such features, entry points, can be mounds, whether ancient megalithic burial mounds or hillocks in the landscapes, in the landscape, caves, certain wells, lake bottoms, bottom of lakes. In Ireland, we have Uvnagoch, the Cave of Cats in County Roscommon, Ireland, and that place is deemed to be an entrance into the other world. It is strongly associated with both the Morrigan, the great Irish goddess, the Morrigan, as well as with fairy beings, kind of transit point. There is a story of green children of Woolpit that speaks of this place in Suffolk, England in the 12th century. So this is actually recorded. It's written down. And it speaks about a cave. We're talking about transition points in between fairies and human world, and whether fairies can actually come into our world and humans can go over there. Well, in the Green Children of Woolpit story, farmers in the field found two children, a boy and a girl, brother and sister, turned out, very disoriented. They didn't know where they were. Not being able to withstand the very bright sunlight. They were green. Their skin was green, had a green tone. They didn't speak the language, the farmers in 12th century Suffolk spoke. So it was very hard to get any kind of information from them other than that they pointed out they're coming from caves. So there's a cave there. Those caves had a reputation among people. They were deemed to be points of entrance in the other world. So if memory serves, I remember people having sent like a dog there, with a tied to a rope. And at some point, the rope goes flat and they pull the rope out and there's no dog at the end and the dog never made it out. Make of that what you will. So these children finally are adopted by the community, people in the community, and they were Christianized. They were like taught how to speak the language. They're like fed different, human food. And as they're given human food to eat, regular food, they seem to like very much the beans. Um, their skin tone changes. However, the boy pined and died, and the girl grew up to be like a very independent lady, which was not in line with what women were supposed to be or behave at the time. So she was not really ladylike. And the children, so these children were able, once they learn enough language, they told that they were coming from a different place, different world, and they got lost in the caves. They were told not to go deep into the caves, but they did. And from where they come from, this kind of twilight, so there's never bright sun above. So they were like very disoriented by the very bright sun that they were exposed to when they came out from the caves. So they came basically from an otherworldly space dimension and ended up in the human world. So kind of an answer there. Yeah, there's possible for fairy beings to come into the human world, and in the same way as humans can be adopted and made to become part of the fairy, the other crowd, fairy beings, fairy children could be integrated and made a part of the human world. So back to so we'll look at the reversal of the situation in a moment when humans actually cross into fairies. So how do fairies look? They can have any size, any color. I have the experience with fairies who appeared as like white, and when I'm saying white, I'm talking about an unnatural kind of white. So it's not like human and alive white. It's like chalk white, or a white that's more like porcelain and with a certain radiance, shine to it. Not that they look like porcelain, but you get the idea, that kind of unnatural white. I have the experience with fairies that are like a golden brown skin tone and various colors of hair and different colors of eyes. So they vary. They may also display animal features, animalesque, such as tufts of hair, like the ears, or tufts of hair, various areas on the body, hoofs instead of feet. Some of them may have tail. They can shift into animals, so they have the ability to shift in between humanoid and animal form. Look at puka in the Irish lore, that can shift, can look like a goat, can look like a shaggy little horse. But these humanoid fairy beings shifting into animals are completely different things from fairy animals per se, who are just fairy animals and they don't shift into anything else. Kushi, that's the Irish fairy dog. Ishke, that's the water horse. We have Kelpie, we have the puka. So that's a wide variety. Do fairies have pointed ears? Because we're used to see nowadays, and their ears keep growing, with each reiteration and AI reworking of the fairy portrait. They distance themselves more and more and more and more from what fairies used to be seen. To my understanding, yes, they do have pointed ears. I mean, but they're never this long. You know, what I have here on the slide, which apologies, I forgot to describe. There is this male presenting fairy. It's just we can only have the torso and his dark skin, like brown skin, brown features, and his hair is made like dreadlocks, and he has this little bit of an armor on his body, so it's a fighting gladiator style bits of armor with a strap, probably leather strap, reinforced with metal or stone studs that runs across the chest. He has a belt around his waist, similar material, and he has his right arm wrapped into some protection, probably it's sword carrying or weapon carrying side, and it is wrapped into kind of arm bracer. It covers the shoulder and goes all the way down the arm. So um, this fairy gentleman here has pointed ears, and they're longer than what I'm accustomed to seeing and perceiving in, my own fairy related experiences. So worth talking about where fairies' long ears come from. And it started with, I do not remember the name of the painter, but it started with paintings in which interaction between fairies and humans were represented. And since fairies in folklore, they're understood to be oftentimes no different than humans, it was hard to tell in a painting who's the human, who's the fairy. So you can't just write, hey, put arrows on your painting. This is a fairy, this is a human. So artists try to create slightly different features to underline, to make it clear who's the fairy and who's the human subject in the painting. So they started to present fairies with a little bit of different features, one of them being the ears, a bit longer and pointed. But that started like a slight pointing of the ears, so the viewer could discern within the within the painting who's human and who's not. The idea seemed to be inspired by Greek portrayals of the satyr, the fairy being with this hoofs and his pointed ears. So he has this goat attributes, male goat-like attributes incorporated to his person. So that could be the source for inspiration, adding these animal-esque features to fairy subjects in paintings. And then it spread from there. And fairies acquired long ears that kept growing and growing and growing, especially in games, and with the AI creating new portrayals of fairies, the ears appear horrifyingly distorted, more and more so. And bottom line, some fairies do have pointed ears. Some fairies, I'm not talking in art or literature or games, I'm talking about fairies as they appear in nature, and some people still interact with them. And some do have pointed ears, some don't. Do fairies have wings? Same answer. Some do, some don't. Where does the winged fairy idea originate? In very old lore material, we do not really have depictions, especially northwestern Europe, Romania as well. We do not really have Central Europe. We do not really have mentions of fairies being winged. Yes, they can fly, absolutely. That was always the case. They can move around via air transportation, but not really with wings. It seems that the first time that winged fairies appeared, like on in a way that really got attention and gained traction was in Shakespeare's Summer Night Dream. So in the Shakespeare play, in order to make clear who's a fairy and who's a human on stage, for the fairy beings, so first of all, there we have the mention of insect-like fairies, which again is it's a completely foreign concept. It's not encountered in the lore. In the lore, we have mention of smaller fairies, but not really insect-like. So maybe a few inches tall fairy beings, but not tiny, cricket-sized fairies. So here comes, Shakespeare and people, creative in the theater production, theatrical production. You won't have the differentiation. Who's the human subject on stage and who's the fairy subject protagonist on stage. You can't just have people carrying sticks. Hey, I'm, signs. Hey, I'm a fairy and I'm going to do this. So they made gossamer wings, easy to make, easy to put on, and the beings appearing with gossamer wings were distinguished as understood as fairies. And it spread from there. Same as with ears in painting. Actually, the ears appeared probably 300 years later. But the winged fairy was there before this. So first we have wings, then we have ears. Are all fairies small, insect-like, or insect-like small? I believe I already answered that. Some are not. I've heard people reporting experiences having had encounters with very small beings, like fairies that are like insect-like, a couple of inches or smaller. So obviously, yes, there is that, but there are also the testimonials, and not only the testimonials, there are years and years, hundreds of years of folklore in the accounts of people encountering fairies human size. In some situations, like smaller humans, but still human size within the human range for height, or extremely tall, so very tall. So it's a huge variation in height. So some are small, some are not. Do fairies feed on just flower, nectar, and dew? I couldn't resist not to include this. This comes from Theosophical. Presentation of fairies of this pure and essence, sheer spirit. So the emphasis on purity is really annoying because it ties into the Christian concept of pure and impure things, which personally annoys me. So, and I had this argument with people who are like very adamant, kind of banging their fist on the table that fairies do feed on nectar and dew, at which I couldn't help it but ask, okay, then what do your fairies do in winter when there's no nectar and dew available? Are they starving or going in hibernation? So just use common sense. We have the story that I just gave. We have the lore and the myths telling about fairies demanding for offerings made by humans toward them, offerings of cereals, baked goods, milk, and depending on what culture um, you know you're more familiar with, you're going to get exposure to different beliefs and different practices around offering to fairies. There are food offerings made to fairies that include cheese, that include, as I said, breads, wine, milk, fresh water, certain types of fruit. So it's a broad context, but nevertheless, they all point out toward foods that humans would consume as well, like sharing a portion, for the fairy. Whether it's fairies who are related to the deceased, to the dead, or fairies intended as understood, interacted with as guardians of spaces, places, or those beings who dwell on the farmstead in the household. There's in Scandinavia, Nisse, Tomte, husvater, house spirits, they're being offered porridge with a pat of butter on top, um, on at specific times around the year. So no mention anywhere about nectar and dew. That's the point that I was trying to make, and that wasn't around until Theosophy and around the Victorian era, infantilizing fairies, and we have all these like baby like beings with flower caps on their head and sleeping on flowers. I mean, they might be cute, um, but it's not what's known and what people have experienced for hundreds of if not thousands of years. And um, surely the ones that we're talking about demand more than nectar and dew to be presented with. Okay. So, fairy lady in the same modern fashion of the long-eared fairy. Um, I've really like the picture because it shows like like the variety that we have in how fairy beings look. So she's like we also have this idea, or many of us have this ideas of fairies like just frozen in time and always appear in medieval long gowns and flowy outfits and with crowns and wands and what have you. Um, so I really like this modern because they evolve. All beliefs are growing and evolving over time, like human society grows and evolves over time. And we have this lady here, so she wears leggings, like nice yellow green leggings, and she has very fancy boots. Um, they're like an orange brown, matching her top. So it's a strapless top, orange, and top and part of the boots seem to be made of this material. It's like partly butterfly wings or flower petals, I cannot say. And she has something, matching around her wrists, like little ornaments. Not really arm bracers, but ornaments. And she has a very modern hairstyle, like all the hair moved on one side, kind of shaved at the temples. Beautiful, beautiful makeup. Her skin is a golden tone. So just look the broad variety that we have across the spectrum with fairies with all different skin tones, hairstyles, dress codes, and so on. And she also has ears that are longer than what I would like to see on a fairy representation, but I love her nevertheless. So, how does the existence of fairies impact us and fairies in contemporaneity? Because we live today, we don't live in the Victorian age. Are fairies and their world fixed systems that do not change with the passing of time? I think I just answered that question because we saw how imagery of fairies has changed over time. And it reflects, very much, and it should reflect very much, trends in fashion, the same, matching the changes that occur in the human world about fashion and how we think and how we behave. So these are not fossilized beings and their world is not fossilized. There might be time discrepancy between them and us, their world and ours, but nevertheless, they do change in the way they look and very likely in the way they interact with humans, which prompts the question, why knowing the older lore and folklore is important. And I would like to make the following parallel here. When we learn about the Middle Ages, and some of us have this like nostalgia for times that we never lived in, and think of castles and living in the woods or living in as very romantic things. But the reality is brutal. Think of the sanitary conditions of the Middle Ages. Think of going to the bathroom in the Middle Ages. So not really something to be longing for. And when we're learning about what people thought, believed, did in the Middle Ages, it doesn't serve the purpose to live again, to go back in time and live in less comfortable conditions and less sanitary conditions. The purpose is to see how things evolved over time, both in terms of how technology influenced people's lives and beliefs, in terms of how religious beliefs shaped our interaction with nature and natural environment and even with one another. Because all of these have influenced, all these socioeconomic political factors have influenced our perception and our relationship to the world of fairy and the world of spirit and the world, denizens of the natural world and the spirit world in general. And these changes have not been always for the better. And this alienates us. Look where we are nowadays in an deep ecological crisis and political crisis and social crisis. And part of it is because of the disconnect that systems, political religious systems, have inflicted upon us, which further moved us farther and farther away from the other world, from the interaction with fairies and fairy beings. So that no longer have a space, have a place in the life of modern humans, and it comes at a cost. We'll talk more about this. So we're paying attention to the past because when we bring together old tradition and personal gnosis, we get the full gnosis that we have it today, knowledge that we have today through our own experience with the natural world and what we perceive spirit world. This helps us get the full picture of how things evolved. For the specific purpose of our class, for those of us who seek interaction and connection and relationship to fairy beings, knowing the past is necessary when you're contemplating a long-term relationship because you can see how your partner transformed over time. This doesn't mean to judge your partner over things that they did or said at some point in their lives, but notice how they changed over times because some people change for better, some people change for the worse. And noticing that curve along which the change happened, that gives you ideas, gives you information that you may choose to act or not to act, to stay in the relationship or not stay in the relationship. And this applies to fairies as well as humans, partners. Now, do fairies have an interest in or play a part in the planetary ecosystem? In my opinion, and the opinion of other people that I pay attention to, the relationship between humans and fairies is symbiotic. So both sides must participate for the relationship to be viable. So some people have an interest in interacting with fairies, but for whatever the reason, for a long time, there's no response from the fairy. There's not a relationship. There are situations in which fairies are pulling, tugging at people, certain people, or people in general, to have a relationship, collaboration for whatever purpose with them, and the humans are not interested or not responding. So again, that cannot be a relationship. So each part must contribute to the relationship. There is also the sad converse aspect to this when humans want to have a relationship with fairy beings, just plain extortion. I want a fairy partner, a fairy being, so I can extort benefits from them without giving anything in return. I just want the benefits. I want them to manifest for me. I want them to bring things for me. I want them to be my lovers. I don't care how they feel. I don't care what they do. I just want them to work for me. This rarely ends up well for the human involved. So again, relationships have to be symbiotic. Fairies were pushed out. There are countless stories of what happened when the new religion, the Christianity, came in, and it wasn't Christianity per se that made them leave, but the what was preached to the people to no longer worship um, other deities, no longer connect with the spirits of natural places. So this alienation from the natural environment to which fairies are um, part of. So this alienation made them to pull out. And a lot of the territory, so we have Icelandic lore, Icelandic stories, sagas, telling how the holy man, priests came and sprinkling holy water, and that made fairy beings pulling out of the landscape. And guess what? When they pull out of the landscape, the luck of the farm and the prosperity of the farmstead went with them. In that regard, fairies are powers to be reckoned with. Why not making allies? So whatever degree of belief, whatever your religious beliefs are, there's room for everybody. So even if you're based into a monotheistic, my grandmother, she was a devout Christian, so she's go to church regularly, but she also had the understanding that the world is far more complex than um, a religious establishment is trying to present it to people. I mean, she had her own experience with fairies and the fairy world and fairy beings, and she never had a problem, never saw a conflict in between being a Christian, devout Christian, and interacting with fairies and taking advice and knowledge from them. And I remember hearing her say that, so um, God has created everything, so God has created fairies as well. Where is the problem? So that was her take on interaction with fairies and folk beliefs. So why not making allies? Grandma was right. Let's make allies. Fairies have connections among ancient deities. So wherever your beliefs are, um, you're in good terms with fairies. That may ingratiate you to other powers as well. There are powers that extend beyond deities in the known pantheons. There are powers beyond our levels of comprehension, powers that are not even um, too big to be put into written, um, concise form to be delivered in books. More about these in part 2, Advanced Fairy Magic. I see myself on a mission of re-enchanting the world, and this is what working in partnership with fairies is about re-enchanting the world, bringing back that magic, bringing back that kinship to nature, opening up hearts and souls and minds to what was here before, what was here eons before, energetically, spiritually, and have that feeding, nourishing, nurturing this life of ours that's getting more technologized and dehumanized in the same time. So I adopted the expression re-enchanting the world from Morgan Daimler and Kat Heath, whose works are listed in the bibliography and resource section. Gaining access to and even traveling to fairy, physically getting into the other world or fairy. We have lore, folklore, and modern accounts that talk about incidents involving people slipping inadvertently into fairy territory. And sometimes people willfully knowing how to get there and actually getting there. So we have, there's lore, and there are accounts of people falling asleep in different places that they were known those places to belong to fairies, and actually they wake up and they realize they're no longer in the human space, they were somewhere else, and they spent into fairy, they realize they're into fairy, and they spent there what seems like 3 days. And then when they actually released and returned to the world of humans, the human involved realizes that several years have passed. Oftentimes, several years have passed. Sometimes it's a matter of days, sometimes it's a matter of years. So there is a physical aspect on getting into the other world or fairy. And there are, or psychically travel to the other world or fairy. And this is what we're going to concern ourselves with over the next minutes. This can be achieved through meditated states, dreams, and trance. So trance are deeper states than just meditative. It's like more transporting. And the picture that is on the slide, there is it shows a wall, this fortress type of wall with a little staircase leading to a door, wooden door, guarded by an otherworldly being, supposedly a fairy being, and she's holding this swords with a flaming blade. There are 2 dragon statues guarding right and left. So they're statuary, probably bronze. It's kind of a golden metal there to the right and left of the door. And there is a traveler, soon to be a man, with a little fox at his right side, and a lantern on the floor at his left side. He has a bow and a quiver with arrows on his back. And he's obviously trying to get up the stairs and probably negotiating with a fairy guardian to let him in. We can see light beaming from behind the door. So the crack door is a little bit open, and there's light coming through. So very suggestive of the quest of somebody attempting to get into fairy, whether physically or psychically. So this could be a nice prompt for a journey. Okay, before actually journeying into fairy, I would like to look here at what happens when we psychically journey, or go into deep states of trance and meditation, and how does it happen, to be here in this world, in this embodied experience, yet find ourselves in a different place, into another world, into another dimension, interacting with beings from there. So bear with me and just take a look at the drawing on your slide. And the layer 1, the top of the pyramid, the red, that stands for personal, conscious, active state of mind. I'm doing that, I'm doing this, I'm not doing this. So the decision-making level and that part that dictates the steps to be taken. Level 2, this bluish green, personal subconscious. This is internalized knowledge, habits, default patterns. So things that we've learned, and they think, like you're driving a car or brushing your teeth in the morning, or anything that becomes a habit acquired. And yeah, you're still thinking when you're driving a car, but every single individual step, turn on the engine, turn on the lights, those have been internalized already. So level 3, light blue, the personal unconscious. So this is accessible in dream or dreamlike states, under hypnosis, under the action of hallucinogens. By the way, fever can be a hallucinogenic. Trance state reached in meditation and journey. So these are deeper states where things happen. You bump into things that, you discover things that excuse me, without knowing where do you know them from, because you never actually learned them. Layer 4, dark blue, indigo blue. This is the collective unconscious. So this is a pool, universal, collective pool of information from generations past and present, memories that the planet itself has about its beginnings, as well as most recent knowledge in circulation from all domains of science and humanities, both constructive and destructive. So information, thought, knowledge, this is information. So information, energy cannot be destroyed or created. It constantly transforms. It's a continual transformative state, and it floats in there. So it's not really local. To some extent, it permeates this level of the universal unconscious. So a lot of this is drawn from Jungian psychology. Again, Jung himself has his own flaws and his, drawbacks. I'm not really endorsing many of his ideas, racist or misogynist or any of that. But there are some useful bits of information that he was surely ahead of his time in his thinking, and he put out there some interesting bits of information that, don't throw the baby out of the tub. Don't throw the baby with the water out of the tub. So I just throw the water and keep the baby, which is those bits of information that are useful for us to understand what is happening when we're having certain experiences, so we don't sound like really weird, really disconnected with anything that is reason and rationality when we're talking about esoteric and mystical experiences. So back to our pyramid. The pyramid illustrates how the mind and different levels of awareness, because these are levels of awareness, participate in journey and meditation to get us where we wish to go. So level 1, what happens? Here's when we engage our mind, like intentionally using all the tech that we learn to pursue our goal. You learn the steps of a meditation, and this red triangle is the moment when it's like you decide, I'm going to meditate for this purpose. And I know I'm going to listen to the meditation, the steps, and I'm going to follow the guidance. And then also you are in this space when you have to make course corrections. You realize that you're drifting into sleep, and you have to tell yourself, okay, hey, psst, come back. You're drifting into sleep. You're supposed to follow the meditation. So this never really goes 100% quiet. The important part is to know how much of it to allow, to still be meditating and not pretending or forcing a certain imagery or scenario to play in our head. That's made up. So to what extent we need to use this red, the faculty of directing and control and giving instruction to ourselves, to what degree to engage that without compromising the spontaneity of the process that unfolds. Level 2, default patterns take over to guide the journey, so we can relax more without having to overthink each step. The more we practice meditation techniques, the more a certain way to get to some place or coming back from there, or certain patterns set for interacting with different beings, they built up. And there is a degree of, back to the analogy with driving, there is a certain degree of automatism that you want it to happen. So you don't have to, okay, and now I have to turn the steering wheel 5 degrees to the right and turn on, the turning lights. So you don't want to be given direction to that level to yourself, because it's maddening. You need a certain degree of automatism, but also it's combination with awareness. Okay, there's a car coming, I have to wait. There's a thought intruding, I have to let go of that and focus on my journey. So this second level is about encouraging the default patterns, set up patterns to take over. And then with default patterns and learn habits, take about meditation, taking over, one can relax deeper and drop into this third level where we witness a balance in between participating and surrendering. So actively participating by, following the meditation, the course of the meditation, and surrendering. So the experiences that happen are genuine experience and not things that we tell ourselves should happen or want to have happen. We allow ourselves to go as far as possible, and at some point, what happens in this indigo level starts bubbling and surface into the blue. So knowledge, information that's here at the bottom of the cauldron starts bubbling and penetrate. So it comes to meet us if we are really relaxed in this state. So that's when we have those flashes of inspiration, things coming through. So and then we can pick it up with our awareness, and then later on use the conscious mind to analyze the information when we're writing down things and then trying to make sense out of what happened in the meditation. So this is like my explanation of what's happening in a state of journey. So yes, we are going to transcend the confines of the active thinking, logical, rational mind and go into more mythical time and esoteric spaces and otherworldly places that, as we discussed, they run on timelines that are a little bit different than ours, and interact with those spaces and beings in the spaces from there. This is the first journey. Journeys, in my opinion, have to be short and meaningful. This first journey is just an exercise how to get to start establishing, creating those neuronal pathways, creating the hardwiring for going to ferry, whatever place in ferry you're meant to land on today, and then coming back out from it. At this point, do not try to interact, bring about, or focus on interacting with any kind of fairy guide. That's going to happen next. Right now, it's just going there and coming back. Next meditation will be going there, interacting with a fairy guide, and then coming back. I want this going there and coming back become a well-established, that kind of beaten road that you go back and forth or forth and back very quickly. First time you do it, second time you do it, it may take a little bit longer time. Hopefully, in the long run, when you have to do this by yourself, it should be like 1 minute to go there, 1 minute to come back, or 2 minutes each way. So these are things intended to be efficient, not overly elaborated and time consuming. Only this class is time consuming, I know. So let's journey. I will use the same guidance that it is on the screen, so you can review this at a different time when it suits you. For now, just close your eyes, come to breath. And each time you exhale, feel dropping inward, like dropping behind the space, dropping into the space behind your closed eyelids. Surrender to sensation. You're floating, with each exhale descending deeper and deeper within yourself. You're descending, your descent slows down until you get a sense of sturdy ground beneath your feet. And you feel you're standing on a path. You feel and see thick mist surrounding you. And light penetrates through the mist. It feels silky. It feels friendly. You're walking through the mist and you find your step. You find your way step by step. And as you advance, the mist clears and you find yourself, you realize you're walking through a forest. Your path takes you to a clearing. There's a feature in that clearing that gets your attention. It could be a large tree, a very large rock. It could be a hillock. Look careful. What gets your attention? Pay attention to the details. Check out the place. You're not yet to encounter your fairy guide, so don't seek that encounter yet. It is a brief visit, just getting acquainted to the space. And now you're turning around and you return to the path that brought you here, walking back through the woods. Light is dimming. Night is falling. And soon, a dark, moonless night surrounds you. You walk in the dark, and you feel the path disappearing from beneath your feet, so you float. With each inhale, you grow increasingly more buoyant. With each exhale, you land back into your body more solidly with each out breath. Come out slowly. Wiggle hands and fingers and toes. Stretch. And open your eyes. So this was a very brief tour. This is how you will get to a fairy space through a journey type of meditation. Before meeting your fairy guide, which is going to happen next, there is some fairy etiquette good to know, whether it is for this journey or for further fairy encounters. So remember that you are going on their territory. And you go there because you choose to. Nobody invited you. Nobody asked you to come over there. So you have to make yourself liked, be accepted, and be well received. So you have to be polite. So when you're going to meet your fairy guide, you're going to greet and introduce yourself. You're going to ask their name. Be prepared not to get one. You may not get any name. Be careful what you're being asked. They may have questions or there might be just solid silence, but in case you're being asked questions, answer honestly and diplomatically. Avoid to answer by saying, I'm not sure how I feel about this now, so please keep this in mind. I am not sure how I feel about this now. What are other options? Fairies do not lie and abhor being lied to. However, they're very clever with words and there can be fine print to what they say. So please do not make promises that you cannot keep. Do not enter into binding agreements, and that's like written in capitals. It's not shouting, it's just warning, do not enter in binding agreements, at least not yet. It's like you agree to marry someone on your first date. It's kind of that degree of risk. Then extricating and breaking apart, getting out of the relationship will be much more complicated. So, and you have information once you are out of the journey state, it's your job to cross-validate the information that you have received and see, does it align to what's known from lore and folklore? It doesn't have to be exactly what you read in stories, but does it align? Does it follow, at least remotely, any of those known typologies? Does it line up with what other people have experienced? So always cross-validate the information. And the picture here is that of what I interpret to be a fairy being with this demeanor of a sage. It has long hair and it keeps the book open and it's like a wizened older face and it keeps the hands, stretched out. It's a really nice, welcoming, but also cunning. Like I'm looking at this face and it's like wittiness and cunning in that expression. So it's a statue and it stands against some foliage. In this journey, you are going to meet your fairy guide. So we're going to follow the same outline as before, but in the clearing by the rock or hillock, you will meet your fairy guide and remember fairy etiquette. If your journey takes a different route than the guidance, you have the option of going wherever the current, the stream is taking you. So you decide, I don't care about the guidance. I just want to go wherever I feel drawn, wherever my mind takes me, the waves are taking me. Or you have the option to very gently, remember that red triangle, the top of the pyramid, very gently make some course correction and return to the guided journey. We're going to do the journey and then we're going to have a conversation about these last two lines on the slide. So for now, just close your eyes and come to breath. You are aware of your body and breath. And ride the waves of your breath inward, getting softer, surrendering to sensation with each incoming breath, expanding with each outgoing breath, softening and dropping deeper within. You're descending through timeless time. And your descent slows down until you feel sturdy ground beneath your feet. You realize that you're standing on a path. Thick mist surrounds you. It is dense, white, silky, and pleasant to touch. And light penetrates through, making the mist sparkle like diamond dust. You're walking through the mist and find your way step by step. The mist clears and you find yourself walking through a forest. You notice the tree, the foliage, if there's foliage. The air temperature, any vegetation, if any. The path leads you through a clearing the same clearing you visited before. And here is that particular land feature that you can see from afar, whether it's a tree, a large rock, or a hillock. You pause and look at that land feature, and coming from behind it or emerging straight out of it, there's someone. You wave at them knowing that it is your fairy guide. They wave back, and you begin walking in that direction. As you draw closer and closer, you begin to discern their feature. How do they present themselves? What do they wear? You are now close enough to talk. And you state your name and greet politely. And tell them why you're there. What brought you into this space, the threshold between your world and theirs. You may ask for their name. And if they give you a name, try to remember it. If they don't, be okay with this. They may state their name explicitly or hint at it through a symbol gesture. Through showing you something. Or they may just change the conversation entirely. Ask them if they have any questions or advice for you, expressing that you'd be immensely grateful for their input or wisdom. If you have a question, ask your question in polite terms and without leaving the impression that you hold that person under any obligation to answer. Express gratitude for whatever you have received until now. Ask for permission to return. And ask if there is any gift your fairy guide would like to receive from you. It could be a one-time gift. like an offering of sorts. Make sure that what you promise to give is within the realm of possibility. Make sure that what you promise to give does not hurt you or any other being, human and non-human. And if you do not agree with what is being required from you, simply say so and offer something else as a substitute. You might be asked to perform some service like cleaning up a park, caring for a certain tree specimen, studying a specific fairy tradition. Offerings can take multiple forms. Find balance in between what you're being asked and what you can actually deliver. Your visit is about to end. So politely say your goodbyes. And begin moving away from your guide and from the place. You can turn around and walk back toward the path that brought you here. And then find your way through the woods. Night is falling. Darkness surrounds you. You walk in the deep, dark, moonless night. And you sense the path disappearing from beneath your feet. And you begin to float and float, growing more buoyant with each inhale and with each exhale, settling once again in your physical form, growing buoyant, spacious and alive with the inhale, grounded and connected with your physical form with each exhale. And when you feel fully present here and now, begin to move, wiggling fingers and toes and stretching. And come out slowly. If there's anything you want to write down or anything that you want to pin in your memory, like a detail from your journey, this is the time to do so. Just very briefly, the most important aspects, the most important things to note down would be if your fairy guide gave you any name, if they told you anything that you should know when you had that part of the conversation, is there anything I should know? anything you want to share with me? So if they said anything or showed you anything, just jot down on it. Could be one word, showed stone or red rock or bluebird or something like that. If you had a question, what was the answer? That's something important to write down as well. If there was a request for a gift, offering, or service, what was that? And do not worry if you don't remember or if there isn't an awful lot about it, because there will be many more repeats of this journey for you. So, while you're finishing writing down, adding bits and pieces of information to your journal, I will explain the rest of the slide's content. There is a link for home practice. There is a recorded meditation. It's on YouTube. This is the link. It's active, it's live. There are links to meditations also in resources and on the resource at the end of the class. So you can redo this meditation. If this was like a rough, more disjointed type of experience, not knowing what to expect, too much of the active mind pitching in, that's absolutely fine. You know, you train several times, you try several times until you really learn how to ride a bike or, balance on roller skates. Or so it may take more than just one go to really internalize this, make it run smooth. So practice with the link that's on YouTube, or that meditation is a little bit different. Same essence, just different ways of doing it. If you don't like that one so much, you can always come back to this and replay the recording and follow along and do the meditation. So that's your choice. You have two options there. Get into the habit of journaling right at the end of your meditation. Write down the important things because they will fade pretty quickly from memory. Eat. Ground yourself with some food and something to drink, like fresh water or juice. Good ways to drink. If you feel very spacey and having a hard time to reconnect with this land, this world, get something salty. Okay, pinch of salt under your tongue or grain of salt under your tongue is very helpful. You may be given a different name in fairy. You may realize, you may have the surprise that your fairy guide starts calling you by a different name. There is also the chance that you may be given a different name while in your bright, alert, and awake state, or in a dream, or somehow a new name may come to you as your true name. If that happens, you can change it officially in fairy and have your fairy guardian reinforce that or witness that or officially bestow that name on you. And the way you do this, you would just you follow the same template, either the one that's in your home practice link, the one on YouTube, or go back to the meditation we just did. And when you go there and you meet your fairy ally, just ask them, I have this new name. Would you officially rename me? I want to be known in fairy as such and such, or I agree to be known in fairy in this world to you and other fairy allies. I agree to be such and such. Or you may just go there and ask your fairy guide, is there a specific name you want to call me? Or I should carry here in fairy, or outside of fairy, just in real life? What's my true name? And instead of that whole conversation, asking questions, just be there and wait for the fairy guide, to give you the name or confirm the name, and say thank you and see if there's any service or anything they expect from you to do for the gift that you received. And then you part ways, exactly what we did in the previous meditation. Now, where to go from here? And the picture here is someone looking through a window, and what they see is a night, beautiful night. The tones aren't really those of blue and that you would expect from a night sky, but rather dark brownish, maybe hints of purple. What we see, however, are some tree silhouettes. So remember, this is somebody looking through a window, and what they see through this window are like the silhouettes of trees. It's probably winter because there's no foliage on trees. And there's a big full moon, glowing orange. And then there is a lady coming towards the window, a fairy being. So she holds a lantern in one hand with a candle inside the lantern, so kind of a lantern candle in a jar. And there's all sparks and little star-like dots floating around her, and she's coming toward this window. So if you're the one looking through the window, she's coming toward you. So it looks like a late autumn night to me. So where do we go from here? Well, to give you very briefly my story after I was initiated into fairy seership or fairy witchcraft by grandma. So the initiation was a very simple thing. We did some chanting together, and that happened quite spontaneously, so there wasn't anything planned on. So it just happened. I was trying to perform a ritual, hiding like all by myself. I was about 9. And I was trying to do those things, hiding from grandma, but I really wanted to have this connection with fairy beings, and she really didn't want me to have this connection with fairy beings, but it happened nevertheless. So dealing with a very stubborn child, that would be me, and very prone to mischief and trouble. What a shocker. She decided that it's better to tell me how to deal with these beings and actually initiate me, kind of help me establish this kind of connection. So your very journey that you did or you will do again to fairy, that could be an initiatory, that could become an initiatory experience for you. So initiatory experiences don't have to be flashy. You don't have to have aurora borealis shining around you, or the reality, the light around you changing color, and hearing voices, or lightning and thunder and anything like this. Initiatory experiences can be very subtle, and they can happen in dreams. They can happen while you walk in the park. They can happen when you honestly just try to sit down and meditate and connect with a fairy ally. So your initiatory experience is your initiatory experience, and the answer to that will come based on what your intent was, the one that you wrote on paper and energized. So that will be taken into account as well. So my story, after I was initiated, I expected something very flashy, very big to happen, and obviously nothing of the sorts was happening. And I'm asking my grandma, so now I'm initiated. What am I supposed to do? Nothing's happening. And she's like, what do you want to happen? That's when you start working. So nothing's going to happen until you start working, and working means you're going to see what is expected from you. There will be times when nobody will pay from the fairy realm, nobody will pay any attention to you because these are not imaginary friends. They're beings with their own agendas and problems to solve and missions in this world. They don't have time to hang around just because you're getting bored and want to hang around. So you do your work, and your work, what does it mean? Periodic meditation. That was, I mean, my grandmother's case. She said you keep doing your offerings regularly and you take omens. You look around and you see how the nature, how the surroundings speak to you. My advice for you would be make offerings. Offerings, remember, it can be just a cup of water left on a windowsill with the intent for the fairy beings of the house and surroundings to enjoy. Offerings, we're going to dissect, detail, and go deep into offerings into part 2. It can be a really complex topic. I'm just trying to simplify it here. Offerings can be anything that you do to connect deeper with them and feed them energy in this way. Like when you study, when you read about fairy lore, when you're studying or choosing to engage with the fairy lore within a certain cultural context. Let's say that you have a crush on Romanian fairy lore and you choose to relate to that and cultivate a relationship with Romanian fairy beings, or fairy beings from any of the cultures in the Slavic area or in the Norse, Germanic, Scandinavian, Irish. Just do it respectfully, listening to native voices. So that would be considered an offering, like a really good, well-received offering. So, and meditate, journey to consolidate what you have started in this class, spend time outdoors, care for outdoors. You don't have to do, I don't know, activism. That's beyond your possibilities and your budget of time and other resources, but helping to clean the local park, helping to clean the local creek or beach, feeding the birds in your backyards, anything that makes the place you live in cleaner and prettier and more friendly toward life in general. Birds, animals, that helps. Journal. Journal your experiences. I said offerings and continue to study and learn. We have an exclusive and secret group, Whispers in the Twilight, the Fairy Glen. So you'll have to find it on Facebook, or you have to befriend me on Facebook so I can give you access to that. So it's a very small community. I'm not opening it to, it's not randomly open. It is only for people who have participated in these courses, and it's also, so some of the authors, writers, and teachers that are indicated in the resources are also members of the group. So if you ever have questions and you ask them there will be more than just one qualified, well-prepared voice to answer. There is a part 2 for the intention setting ceremony. You still have the slip of paper. It will be done on a full moon, and it will consist in burning the paper. How do you do this? You're going to need I'm just going to make this example. I have this little shell. You'll probably need something that's bigger than this. A fireproof container. And you're going to put your paper, your slip of paper, you wrote your intent. You don't need to reread anything again, just put it there. I like to add fragrant herbs. You can have rose petals. You can't go wrong with rose petals and lavender when it comes to fairies, by the way. Or you can put just drops of oil if you don't have the herbs. lavender, rose, fir, sage, amber. You can't go wrong with any of these. In one of the meditations, you can ask your allies what are their favorite herbs, fragrances, and you can absolutely use that to make your request, your intention more presentable. And then you're going under the full moon, you're going to burn, set it aflame, and then scatter the ashes. Once the ashes are cold, make sure you don't scatter hot ashes, you don't set anything aflame. You can scatter the ashes in a flower pot that you have. You can just burn it by a window. Make sure you don't set off smoke alarms. You can burn it by a window and put the ashes in a flower pot. So it's nothing super spectacular. You can carry the ashes in a park nearby or a green space nearby and just drop them at the bottom of a tree. So their ashes is nothing toxic, there's nothing harmful in those. As you scatter the ashes, on your slide is scatter the ashes in the wind. That's I'm going in my backyard and scatter the ashes in the wind. Wherever you're scattering the ashes and however you're doing that, ask the fairy gods or fairy liminal powers to answer your requests favorably. So you can appeal any higher powers that you wish, depending on what your beliefs are. And in part 2, where there's a lot of meditations and a lot of hands-on practices and self-healing with the assistance done from fairy guides, we're going to go deeper into fairy gods or fairy liminal powers and see who are those and what are those and why do they matter. And once you have that knowledge, by no means you are compelled to follow. It can be just informational, or it could be something, tidbits in there that you want to incorporate in your practice. Goes either way. So you give thanks, you express gratitude to whoever is there, to take your petition, your so think that fire is transformative, and it takes something from, in this case, from the physical piece of paper that carries your intent, and it's like an offering is being through fire is being carried out to different energetic levels, different spirit realms, where it's going to be received and processed and answered accordingly. For offerings, your offerings here, pour out offerings, it can be a little bit of water if you're in a park, or you're scattering the ashes inside the house, by any house plants. You can pour a little bit of water as an offering. If you choose to leave food offerings, like a slice of bread or a little bit of milk, offerings can be minute amounts. They don't have to be like full, platters. So whatever it is, you can leave it out on a windowsill, leave it for about 24 hours and then discard, just compost it. It is believed that fairies will take whatever energy serves them, the food in energetic form, and then leave the what doesn't serve them, they leave it behind. So, and it is done. So you can do this right now at the end of this class if it happened to have a full moon. If not, wait until the next full moon, and this is how you're going to dispose. This is what you're going to do with your finalize, trying to find the word. This is how you're going to finalize your intention setting process. This is the bibliography and resources, and the picture at the bottom of the page shows a book, an open book with sparks and rainbows and beautiful colors shooting up from the pages. You have here blogs with lots of fairy encounters and fairy experiences. You have the Robert Kirk. You have the exact translation that I would suggest you get because it has comments. Otherwise, if you don't get it translated, if you don't get the adaptation text, and it's old, archaic language, it's very hard to read. Lots of papers, articles, my own included, books, and you have again, it's a journey to fairy, how to just go and come back. You have meet your fairy guide, and you have recharging for magic and energetic healing work. That exercise that we did, you draw in the energy in your pelvis, and then you fan the coals, and then you shoot the energy through your hands, and then you bless, energize, heal. Spiritual healing. So all the links are here for you to practice. And this takes us to the end of a very long class. And I thank you very, very much for bearing with me. And I really hope this is useful and that you want to keep in touch. And hopefully this will ignite your interest. So I will see you in Fairy Herbs for Fairy Magic. That is easier, shorter class than this, believe it or not. And then part 2 of Fairy Magic, where we will get into more applications of Fairy Magic. This is how you work with fairy guides once you have this foundation really set in. So thank you very, very much. And I'm looking forward to see you again in the next classes.